Somewhere in the black water of the Picayune Strand tonight, a transmitter is beeping. It is doing exactly what it was built to do, pulsing on schedule, broadcasting its position through miles of flooded cypress. A clean electronic heartbeat, steady as a metronome, coming up out of the muck. There is only one problem. The animal that carried that transmitter is gone. Not dead on the ground beneath it, gone. Swallowed whole by something the beeping cannot describe, something that took an apex predator down without leaving a single drop of blood, and slipped back into the water like nothing had happened. For years, the Burmese python ruled this swamp, the animal that ate alligators, the animal that swallowed deer. The thing every other creature in the Everglades learned to run from, with no equal and no predator of its own. That was the entire premise, that was the settled science, and then the biologists tracking those pythons started losing them. One radio signal after another going dark. Every time they reached the coordinates, there was no carcass, no struggle, no shed skin. Only the transmitter still pulsing from inside something else's body. Then a camera finally caught what was doing it. And it emptied a room full of scientists of every word they had. So here is what I want you to sit with before we go any further. The answer to what is eating these snakes is coming, and it is on film. But you will not feel what those researchers felt unless you first understand why what that footage shows was supposed to be flatly impossible. So stay with me, do not skip ahead, because once you see the thing in the leaf litter, you cannot unsee it. Let me take you back to how this started, because it began as about the most unglamorous science you can imagine. Ian Bartoszek and his team at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida were running a field study that on paper reads like nothing at all. Surgical transmitters implanted inside Burmese pythons, radio tracking through the wetlands of the Picayune Strand and the edges of Big Cypress National Preserve, movement corridors, hunting ranges, survival data, the kind of slow, methodical work that ends up in a spreadsheet, not on the news. Understand what these transmitters actually were, because it changes everything that follows. These were not tags clipped onto a scale. They were surgical units implanted inside the animal, engineered to broadcast for months. Built to keep pulsing no matter where the snake dragged them through the flooded wilderness. So when one went silent, the first thought was always the same: a dead battery, a failed unit, never the animal itself simply vanishing. Day after day, the team pushed through chest-high water, following the signals, heat pressing down like a weight, cypress roots grabbing at their boots, sawgrass sharp enough to open skin. The patient, thankless labor of learning how an invader moves through a place it was never meant to be. Here is the fact the whole study rested on. In the Everglades, the Burmese python sits at the very top. Nothing was supposed to be able to touch it. That was the reason they were out there in the first place. To study the monster, not to find out what was eating it. Python 19 was the first to go. 3 weeks of clean data. Movement patterns, rest cycles, activity windows, all of it textbook. And then total stillness, not the stillness of a cold-blooded animal slowing on a cool morning, not a rest between hunts. The other kind, the kind that means only one thing. So the team pushed through the cypress and the sawgrass and the standing water to reach the coordinates. And when they got there, every single person stopped at once. No carcass, no blood, no drag marks, nothing disturbed at all. Just that faint, steady pulse, broadcasting from somewhere inside something else's body. They circled the spot, checked the water, checked the brush, followed the signal straight down to its source, and there was nothing to find. Nothing except a transmitter, beeping up out of the muck like a clue with no crime attached to it yet. Something had swallowed their python whole. Transmitter and all. And whatever it was still out there. Still moving, still digesting. Think about what that requires. A Burmese python is not a mouse. It is a fast-growing muscular constrictor, the animal everything else in that swamp fled from, and something had taken one down so cleanly that a trained crew standing on the exact spot, could not find a trace it had ever lived. Once is a fluke, a freak accident, the kind of thing you might never see twice. Then it happened again. October of that same year. 2 more signals went flat. 2 more pythons gone without a carcass, without evidence, without a single drop of blood. 2 more transmitters pulsing patiently from coordinates where a living animal used to be. That made 3. 3 snakes, 3 transmitters. Each one recovered from inside something the team could not name. Something still out there, hunting in a swamp, crawling with researchers and cameras, and not one human being had laid eyes on it. So they took what little they had back to the lab and ran X-rays. And then they stood in front of the imaging screen and went completely silent. This is the point where the study stopped being a study. One of the people involved would later describe the work as feeling less like biology and more like a crime scene. Wildlife forensics standing over a patch of swamp where a body should have been, holding only a signal where the body used to be. They were not tracking pythons anymore, they were investigating their deaths. No suspect, no weapon, no real idea what they were even looking for. The X-ray showed a python's spine intact, curled up inside the stomach of something else. The surgical transmitter still sitting there, still broadcasting from inside a predator nobody could identify. One of the animals they pieced back together had measured over 50 pounds and stretched nearly 13 feet. Its neck destroyed, its body buried under brush. Something had killed an apex predator that size, taken it whole, and walked away into the water. To even confirm what they were looking at, the team had to work backward from the inside out. A digested skeleton does not announce its species. They matched vertebrae, counted ribs, measured the spacing of bone against known pythons until the identity stopped being a guess. This is what the study had become. Not radio tracking, reconstruction, reading a body that had already half vanished into another body and trying to name the thing that had done the vanishing. Sit with that number. A 13-foot Burmese python is not prey to anything. Not in any version of that swamp anyone had ever mapped. Bartoszek would call it one of the most surreal things he had seen in 20 years in the field. And he was standing in front of an image he could not explain. Notice what that image quietly ruled out. Whatever did this did not tear the python apart and leave it to rot. It took the entire animal in one piece, bones and all, and held it down long enough to begin digesting it. That is not scavenging. That is not an accident of opportunity. That is a predator built on purpose to swallow something nearly its own size. And the list of Florida animals capable of that is almost empty. To understand why this broke the people who found it, you have to understand what a Burmese python is doing in Florida at all, because it does not belong here. This animal evolved on the other side of the planet, the jungles and wetlands of Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, ecosystems that spent millions of years building food webs specifically shaped to hold it in check, predators that hunted it, competitors that crowded it, diseases that thinned its numbers. None of that crossed the ocean with the snakes. The exotic pet trade of the 1980s and 90s shipped thousands of baby pythons into the United States. Cheap, striking to look at, sold to people with no real idea what they were buying. The babies grew to 15 feet, 18-20, and the owners who had wanted a cool little pet made a quiet, catastrophic decision. They drove out to the canals at the edge of the Everglades and let them go. Then in 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore straight through South Florida and ripped open commercial breeding operations, dumping hundreds more into the wild in a single night. A slow leak became a flood. These snakes arrived to find nothing waiting for them. Nothing had evolved to hunt them. Nothing had learned to fear them. They walked into paradise as perfect feeding machines, and they simply began to eat. And what happened next is hard to say out loud. In the worst-hit regions, raccoon populations fell by 99.3%. Not declined, collapsed. Opossums dropped by 98.9%. bobcats fell by 87.5. Marsh rabbits and cottontails were functionally erased from places they had lived for thousands of years. Adult white-tailed deer swallowed whole. American alligators, armored survivors older than the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs, eaten in single meals. Dozens of bird species pulled out of python stomachs, including migrants that had flown all the way from Canada to winter in the Florida sun. This did not unfold over centuries, it happened over decades. In some places, over a handful of years. Dr. Frank Mazzotti, a wildlife ecologist at the University of Florida, who has spent more than 20 years on this invasion, has put the python population somewhere in the tens of thousands, possibly the hundreds of thousands, an invisible army, perfectly camouflaged, endlessly patient, quietly taking apart one of the most irreplaceable wetlands in North America from the inside. And people threw everything they had at it. The federal government banned imports and branded the python injurious wildlife. Florida launched bounty programs, trained detection dogs, flew thermal drones over the sawgrass, ran removal contests that pulled hunters in from across the country, DNA sampling of the water, acoustic monitoring, aerial surveys, multiple agencies, even the Army Corps of Engineers. Nothing moved the needle. And everyone who spent real time on this arrived eventually at the same dark conclusion. Said carefully in grant applications, said bluntly over coffee, the pythons had won. The Everglades was being lost. Mazzotti put it plainly once, standing in the water after weeks in the field. The place was being eaten alive, and there was no predator out there capable of stopping it. Nobody argued. The numbers were too brutal to argue with. And then the transmitters started going dark on Bartoszek's monitors, and the answer that came back was one that not a single expert in the entire state had ever thought to model. Here is what they knew for certain. Something was eating apex predators whole, leaving zero evidence and slipping back into the swamp like nothing had happened. Everything past that point they got wrong. One theory at a time. A giant alligator was the obvious first guess, the apex of the apex, but the evidence refused to cooperate. Gators crush and death roll. They leave catastrophic, unmistakable damage, shattered bone, torn tissue, half-eaten remains scattered across a kill site. These vanished pythons had none of it. No wounds, no marks, just gone. A Florida panther then. Panther's ambush, biting through skull or spine, leaving deep punctures and claw marks, the clear signature of a big cat. There was nothing, no fur snagged on the brush, no scratches, no paw prints pressed into the mud. A black bear, powerful, opportunistic, capable of strange behavior. But bears do not swallow 13-foot snakes, whole and in one piece. Nothing does that. The mechanism itself was wrong, so they worked through every serious predator in the Everglades food chain. Hawks, owls, other large constrictors, each one raised as a candidate, each one examined, each one ruled out. Whatever was doing this operated by a method their models could not produce. So the team did the only thing a desperate research group can do. They bolted cameras across the study area. They aimed them at every spot where a signal had died, and they waited. Weeks of empty footage, saw grass bending in the wind, wading birds picking through the shallows, the occasional raccoon, hour after hour of nothing at all. A field camera does not care about your theory. It just records the swamp exactly as it is, indifferent. Mostly empty. They swapped memory cards, changed batteries, sat in the dark watching nothing, and found nothing. And then one morning, a researcher pulled up a clip, and the review session simply stopped. Nobody in that room said a word for a long time, because the thing on the screen was not an alligator. It was not a panther, a bear, a hawk, or anything that had ever made it onto their list. It was not even large. The footage showed a thick, dark-bodied snake, heavy, muscular, lying dead still in the leaf litter at the water's edge, almost invisible against the rotting vegetation. A perfect ambush. The kind of thing you could step right over and never notice. Then it moved. Explosive, surgical, instant. It locked onto a juvenile python before the prey even registered what was happening. The strike was over almost before the camera could catch it. It was a Florida cottonmouth, a venomous pit viper that had been living in those exact wetlands for thousands of years, an animal every researcher on that team had stepped around on the trail 100 times without a second thought. And it was hunting an invasive Burmese python, and it was swallowing it whole. One native snake eating another, the overlooked thing, the animal that had been there the entire time, winning, while every camera and every expert in the state pointed somewhere else. The footage showed it working slowly, unhinging its jaws around the python's tail, walking the entire body down its throat, inch by inch, until the snake was simply gone. No thrashing, no drama. A patient mechanical process, a predator doing something it had clearly done thousands of times before. And that is the part that landed hardest. This was not a freak event, not some desperate, once-in-a-decade act by a starving animal. It was routine. The cottonmouth was not improvising. It was feeding. The X-rays confirmed the rest. In one documented case, the cottonmouth measured between 34 and 42 inches, and the python inside it was nearly as long. Prey almost its own length, pushing right up against the edge of what anyone believed a snake could physically do. One biologist described watching it as evolution fighting back in real time. Bartoszek did not celebrate. He stood and stared at that X-ray for a long while, because what it confirmed was not one predation event. It was a mechanism nobody had thought to look for. A native animal out there the whole time, doing exactly what it was built to do, while the entire search effort faced the wrong direction. And the moment you understand the animal itself, the only real question left is why it took anyone this long to see. In hindsight, none of this should have surprised anyone. The Florida cottonmouth, Achistrodon conanti, is one of the most underestimated predators in North America. Adults run 30 to 48 inches, with rare individuals pushing past 6 feet. Heavy, muscular, built for a life spent half in the water, in flooded cypress, drowned grass prairies, and blackwater root systems, which is to say, built for exactly the landscape the Burmese python moved into. This was always cottonmouth country. The python simply showed up and squatted in it. That famous display, the coiled body, the gaping jaw, the flash of white inside the mouth that gives the snake its name, is only the warning. The real weapon you cannot see. Cottonmouths are pit vipers. Between the eye and the nostril on each side of the head sits a heat-sensing organ that reads infrared with astonishing precision. They hunt by heat, not by sight, not by smell. Darkness and camouflage mean nothing to them. Even a cold-blooded python, just slightly warmer than the water after basking or digesting, lights up brightly enough to be found in total black. Read that again because it is the whole story in one line. The python's single greatest weapon, the camouflage that lets it vanish from human search teams standing a few feet away, is useless against an animal that hunts by heat. Then there is the venom, hemotoxic, refined over millions of years to destroy tissue and blood from the inside out. Untreated, a bite carries a real risk of killing a grown adult. For smaller prey, it is very nearly always fatal within minutes, and that matters because the cottonmouth never has to win a wrestling match. A python kills by constriction. It has to wrap, hold, squeeze, and outlast. A cottonmouth strikes once, steps back, and lets the venom finish the work. Against a juvenile python that has not built its adult strength yet, the fight is over before it starts. And now the detail that flips the whole story. Cottonmouths prey on more than 24 snake species as a normal part of their diet. Including other cottonmouths, they are ophiophagus, snake eaters by instinct, by millions of years of hardwired behavior. To a cottonmouth, a long, soft-bodied, ground-dwelling reptile is food in a familiar shape. This was never a new skill the python invasion taught them. The Burmese python was just a new item on a very old menu. The invader slithered into the swamp and ran straight into a local that had been eating snakes long before any python ever touched American soil. 3 confirmed kills in a single study area within months. That is a pattern. Biologists now believe Cottonmouths have effectively marked juvenile pythons as high-value, low-risk targets. Old enough to be worth eating, not yet big enough to be dangerous, and something in that swamp learned to hit that window dead center. There is a window, and it is narrow. A Burmese python hatches at around 18 to 24 inches, and for its first year or two, it is small enough that the ordinary residents of the swamp can take it. After that, the math inverts. The snake grows into the thing that eats them. So every predator that has learned this trick is racing the same clock, hunting the python in the brief span before the python becomes something no cottonmouth would ever go near. The kills that matter most are the small ones taken early, before the animal ever reaches the size that made it famous. But the Cottonmouths were not fighting alone. Bartoszek's own tracking data had been telling a second story the whole time. One nobody assembled until the transmitters forced it into the open. Of the 19 monitored pythons in the study, 5 were killed by American alligators. One of the gators responsible measured just 9 feet. These ancient survivors had not surrendered an inch of ground. They had been pushing back the entire time, quietly, unrecorded, not retreating, killing. And the fact that a 9-foot gator could take one down matters, because it means this was not the work of giant bull alligators alone. It was the ordinary mid-sized residents of the swamp, the ones that are everywhere. Then, in June of 2021, a wildlife camera caught something with no precedent in the scientific record. A bobcat, an animal whose own population had been gutted by this invasion, attacked a python nest. Not scavenging, not stumbling onto unguarded eggs, it went straight at the nesting female, slashing with both front paws, driving her back, then methodically raiding the clutch one egg at a time. Sit with what that means. A bobcat weighs a fraction of what a nesting Burmese python does. That python was guarding the single most valuable thing in its life, its own eggs, and was built to defend them against almost anything. The bobcat walked in anyway, and it won. It was the first photographic evidence ever recorded of a native mammal raiding a Burmese python nest. One researcher reportedly watched the clip twice before trusting it. These cats were not running from the invasion. They were not quietly learning to live beside it. They were learning to take it apart. New hunting behavior, invented within a single lifetime, against a threat that had not existed in their territory a generation earlier. Behavior like that is supposed to take many generations to emerge. These animals were doing it in real time, with none of the slow evolutionary runway the textbooks demand. One ecologist put it simply: the bobcats had figured it out before the scientists did, and it kept going. Cameras over the flooded ground caught owls and hawks lifting juvenile pythons out of exposed spots at dusk and first light, pulling them out of the system before they could grow into the giants that swallow deer. Take a python at 18 inches and you erase every deer, every gator, every waiting bird it would have eaten across the decades it might otherwise have lived. A small kill early is worth an enormous amount later. Black bears and Florida panthers were documented taking pythons too, at multiple points across the study area. So an entire coalition had quietly assembled. Pit vipers in the leaf litter, raptors in the canopy, bobcats at the nest, alligators in the water, bears in the brush, all working completely independently, none coordinated, none directed by anyone, all simply doing what millions of years of evolution built them to do: defend home ground against something that does not belong. No memo went out, no species voted. They converged on the same target from 5 directions at once. And in a way that should feel like hope. It is. But the people closest to this data know better than to call it a rescue, because there is a number working against every bit of it. A single female Burmese python lays 12 to 36 eggs in a clutch, sometimes more. She wraps around the nest for the entire incubation, shivering her own muscles to generate heat, defending it against anything that comes near. These animals grow fast and live for decades. The reproductive math is merciless, and it does not care about the defenders. Even if predators hammer a nest hard, a handful of survivors is all it takes. They grow up, they lay their own clutches, and the curve does not climb in a straight line, it compounds. Since Florida's removal program began, human hunters have pulled more than 5,000 pythons out of the wild. The 2024 Florida Python Challenge took nearly 200 in a single weekend. On its own, that sounds like a lot. Then you set it next to Mazzotti's assessment that all of it together is barely scratching the surface. Researchers have walked within a couple of feet of a coiled, fully alert python and seen nothing at all. They vanish beneath the water for long stretches. They fold into spaces no search team would think to check. And enormous stretches of their habitat cannot even be reached on foot. So somewhere in the Everglades tonight, between the cypress roots, a cottonmouth is digesting a python whole, its transmitter still beeping from inside it. And less than a mile away, 100 python eggs are hatching. That is the entire war, contained in one stretch of swamp. One native predator winning quietly in the dark, and 100 new invaders arriving to replace exactly what it just took. The cottonmouth has no idea it is part of anything. It does not know it is the most hopeful image to come out of this crisis in years. It is just doing what it has always done in the only home it has ever known, against something that never should have been here. There is one question all that footage still cannot answer. Not what is eating the pythons. We know that now. The cottonmouth in the leaf litter, the 9-foot gator, the bobcat at the nest, the owl at dusk. The question is whether it is happening fast enough. Whether the cottonmouth that learned to strike a juvenile python can pass that down through enough generations to bend the curve. Whether the bobcat that raided a nest this year teaches something that shifts the whole game a decade from now. Whether all of it together, the vipers and the gators and the raptors and the human hunters, finally adds up to something the reproductive math of a Burmese python cannot simply absorb and outrun. Nobody on earth knows, and that is the honest place this story ends. Not with a solution, not with a defeat, with a cottonmouth digesting a snake in the dark, and a wetland that does not yet have an answer equal to the problem living inside it. So here is what I want from you before you go. Tell me down in the comments, do you think the Everglades can actually claw its way back from this on its own, or has the python already won for good? I read every one, and this is one part of the story the science genuinely cannot settle yet. So I want to know where you land. And if you believe the swamp still has more to show us than it has told, subscribe and tap the bell so you are the first one here when the next signal goes dark and the cameras catch what happens next, because they are still recording, the study is still running, and the next thing that turns up out there could change everything.